Welcome to Siliconsciousness, the DSR Network podcast focusing on the artificial intelligence revolution, politics, and policy.
This podcast is underwritten in part by the U.S. Embassy of the United Arab Emirates. Its editorial content is completely independent, and the views expressed are exclusively those of participating experts. It is presented live, without editing. For further information about the UAE's efforts in the areas of artificial intelligence and technology, go to the website of the embassy at www.uae-embassy.org and search for UAE-US Tech Cooperation. We thank them for their support. We thank everybody who's supporting this podcast for their support, and we look forward to it developing and growing over time because the issue is so important. Hello and welcome to Siliconsciousness. I'm your host, David Rothkopf, and this week, as every week, we are going to talk about some of the big issues that have to do with artificial intelligence and public policy. And today we are extremely fortunate to have with us Professor Renée Cummings. She is a 2023 VentureBeat AI Innovator Award winner, is an artificial intelligence data and tech ethicist, and the first data activist in residence at the University of Virginia School of Data Science, where she was named Professor of Practice in Data Science. She also serves as co-director of the Public Interest Technology University Network at UVA. Did I get all that right?
Yes, you did.
Oh, well, thank you very, very much for joining us. The thing I want to talk to you, because you've done a lot of work on it, is what I would broadly call algorithmic justice as a field. But I want to get to it by plucking a couple of things from the news this week that don't directly have to do with it, but they made me think of it. One is, this morning I was listening to the Supreme Court TikTok discussion. I don't know if you were listening to that. And I was struck once again by the fact that the justices don't seem to know anything about technology, and that the U.S. case is based on certain assumptions about technology that I just think are not true. I can enumerate them, but one that really sort of struck me was they were saying, well, TikTok could take all this data and do whatever they want with it. They can promote, dangerous ideas. They can promote division. They can take the data and give it to the People's Liberation Army, and we won't know. And I thought to myself, well, that's true of every technology organization that there is, because of an issue which I think is a gating issue to get to algorithmic justice and other issues, which is algorithmic transparency. I mean, it's all a black box, and I don't know what Elon is doing with my data, and I don't know what he's prioritizing, how he's prioritizing it, what he's filtering out. And so, I don't know whether it's being used well or not. And that's, one thing on a social network. And of course, it's something quite different if it's a system that a court is using to, determine somebody's sentencing. So I just throw it out there and let you pick up any of those things you wanted to pick up.
Well, I'm going to start where you ended on the word sentencing, because as a criminologist and criminal psychologist, I've spent an extraordinary amount of time in the criminal justice system, and that is the work that brought me to AI and data science, thinking about the ways in which algorithms were overestimating the risks of minoritized individuals within the criminal justice system, and thinking about these algorithms making really high stakes decisions, but yet creating zombie predictions. So when we think about algorithmic justice, I think the criminal justice system offers us an extraordinary space to explore that concept, because we have seen the criminal justice system really not understanding the many dimensions of an algorithm, but yet using algorithms for over 20 years in the criminal justice system. And we've seen a lot of pushback now within the concept of algorithmic justice and data justice. And of course, you raised it, algorithmic transparency. So when we think about the opacity of data, when we think about the opacity of these models, and when we think about the intricacies of the black box, as you raised, and of course questions around proprietary rights and copyright and intellectual property, we know there's a great dilemma, not only of alignment, but a dilemma of understanding. And you raised the question of justices truly understanding the dynamics around algorithms, about large language models, around ChatGPT. So we know the justice system is playing catch up. We know many sectors are playing catch up. So definitely transparency is critical. We know with transparency, we've got to think also of accountability. We've got to think about explainability, because these are very, very critical questions. And when we're using something like an algorithm to make any kind of high stake decision, then we're taking really big chances. So I think this is why I'm so committed to AI ethics and questions around AI safety, and really ensuring those guardrails are in place, but those guardrails are also have a foundation of literacy and the understanding of the, this expansive space of AI. So I think you're right on point. And with TikTok, we know for a lot of young people, it's about commerce. It's about communication. It's about creativity. But yes, when we think about data, there is always the question of national security. But I think there definitely needs to be a lot more dialogue, in that space as well.
Yeah, well, I mean, also, they're picking on TikTok because it is a Chinese company, as if an American couldn't abuse the data, or an American who came here from South Africa, say. I'm just theorizing, and who might have affinities to foreign adversaries himself, and so we don't know. But I do think, there are a couple of things within your question that I'd like to sort of break out and deal with. And one of them is a purely practical question that I've actually dealt with from another perspective, which used to be the editor of Foreign Policy magazine. And I was very interested in the intersection of technology and those issues. And I went around to all the schools of public policy and I said, do you require people to take a course in advanced technology so that they actually understand how this is going to affect the world? And none of them, zero of the top schools did. There was no requirement. A couple of them offered a course, but most didn't even do that. Do law schools? Are law schools training lawyers and judges who will understand this area, which will increasingly drive the way justice systems work?
Most definitely. There's a whole discipline called justice tech. And we know all the top law schools are intersecting data science and law, and of course, AI and law. It's a most critical aspect of foreign policy and AI governance. And of course, so many lawyers who are dealing with this question of now, how does data and of course, AI and Gen AI and agentic AI systems impact our relationship with society? I think what we're seeing is a reimagining of the law that is most critical at the moment. Because when we think about AI governance, when we think about AI regulations, when we think about the EU's AI Act, all of these are legal questions that continue to lead in the space. The challenge is the law is always behind the technology, and the law is always playing catch up. But definitely universities are talking about it along the lines of privacy, of course, along the lines of justice and just regulation in general. And of course, that geopolitical and foreign policy question that, of course, you are the expert in, where we know that our lawyers are leading in that space as well. So definitely it's being discussed. Whether or not it's having a real-time impact, that's the challenge, because we have AI, which is something that continues to change at a speed and a scale that we can't even catch up with. So it's really difficult to deploy what I would call real-time governance or real-time regulations for something that's changing and something that we totally don't have, a real-time grasp on. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think there's a kind of catch-22 in that, because I talk about justices, but they're the law writers as well, and legislators are probably further behind the curve than many people in the legal system. And of course, we've all watched over the past few years as there've been congressional hearings in which they say, well, the internet is a system of tubes, and come up with horrifically dumb analogies, and you're like, oh my God, Chuck Grassley at age 93, is he going to be making the decisions? And he has no idea what this is about. But the problem, the reason I call it catch-22, and by the way, I suspect it's worse at the state level than it is at the federal level. But as change happens more rapidly, there will be more of an appetite for people to use tools to adapt to rapid change. And the tools that help them to adapt to rapid change are AI and other kinds of powered tools. And I think of this in one particular example, which hasn't even happened yet, but maybe you've thought about it. And that is, if the government decided that it wanted to arrest 10 million illegal immigrants, our system is literally incapable of, well, first of all, it's incapable of arresting them. But secondly, it's incapable of arresting the right people, of incarcerating them temporarily while they're being heard, and then of hearing all of those cases. And a bunch of people are going to come up and they say, well, I've got a solution for you. Here's a tech-driven solution. And I just, to me, this is dystopian, but perhaps you see it differently.
I will say this. I think at the end of 2023, I was involved in several of those congressional conversations under the rubric of the AI Insight Forum that was being led by Senator Chuck Schumer. And of course, they were looking for that sort of collaboration to really understand the ethics and, of course, the safety concerns and whether or not, we were comfortable as to where AI is in its development. But also at the state level, you'd be surprised that many of our state legislators are really up to speed on AI. When we look at the different kinds of legislation coming out of different states, we know California is having its own concerns there around AI and the regulation. We know Colorado definitely doing something that really speaks to bringing the requisite level of due diligence and that ethical vigilance that's required for safe and a responsible and trustworthy AI, very important. And when we just think about legislation across the board and the kinds of tools that are required, we know that data and AI, they are tools. They could also be very traumatic in the ways in which they are deploying decisions, but they're also very transformative. When we think about questions around deportation and just questions around criminal justice, when we think about those, we are seeing AI being put to use in ways that are not only tracking and terrorizing individuals, but creating an extraordinary amount of trauma in families as well. So we have got to be so circumspect when it comes to understanding the magnitude of this technology and its ability to, yes, do very positive things. I think we all agree that the technology can do that, but think we need to pay a little more attention around the kind of trauma that we are creating in communities and the ways in which this technology has the ability to undermine the legacies of communities as well.
Well, can you talk more about that? How does the technology have the ability to undermine these communities? What are you worried about right now in the work that you are doing as, sort of the sort of flashing red light issues?
I think for me, it's about the governance. It's also about the ways in which we are, we need to reimagine global governance of AI. I think I'm very committed to the geopolitics of data. Data has been one of the greatest geopolitical game changers, and you know that as well, and the ways in which we're thinking about AI expansionism and the ways in which we're not including the global majority in this conversation at the speed in which we need to do. So that's something that I'm also very concerned about. National security, I spent a lot of time in that space, in terrorism and anti-terrorism, and a lot of studies there at John Jay College in New York around that space. So I'm always thinking about AI and national security. But I think about people, because data is about people. Data is about us. It's about who we are and what we think about and what we dream about and the things that we want to achieve and the ways in which we need to build sustainable and resilient communities and economies. So I'm always thinking about the ways in which data could be used to undermine. For me, data is about decision making. It's about intelligent decision making. And if we use data that's biased, or data that is discriminatory, or data that really has not been vetted for the extraordinary amount of trauma that it could reproduce in communities, then what we're doing is undermining legacies, because we're not giving communities an ability to thrive, because we're making these preconceived decisions based on these algorithms that we really need to dissect just a little more.
Yeah, well, it goes to another thing that's been in the news in the past couple of days. We have a new administration coming in Washington, and this new administration, whether it wants to or not, is going to end up dealing with a lot more AI-related issues just because of the speed of development. And it has a whole host of people who are close to the AI community, who are influential at its highest levels. And that can be a very positive thing and bring a lot of expertise. But those people bring some strong opinions to this, right? In the course of the past week, I can't help but touch upon two of them. But one was in today's Financial Times. There's a column by Peter Thiel, which essentially says, the internet can free us all from the control of elites of our information, and trust us. It was kind of bizarre and not terribly well written, but it was part of the trust us argument that you hear a lot out of Silicon Valley. But we also saw the transformation, the change in policies that took place at Meta this week, as Mark Zuckerberg seemed to be, adapting to changing political winds. And, some of it was about fact checking. But some of it was about DEI, and they've gone in, and they're sort of getting rid of DEI programs, and there is him and Musk and some of these other people a real sort of allergy to that. And if you don't take those issues into consideration, it strikes me that it becomes a kind of hostile environment to deal with things like algorithmic discrimination, where you just sort of say, leave it to us, everything will be fine. And we're not going to bend over in those directions because, whatever our political reasons are. And we've already got a problem with a lot of the code being written by a bunch of nerdy white guys in California, and not women, and not people of color, and not people in the emerging world. And so I'm wondering, are you worried about the trend? At the moment, we should be grappling more effectively with algorithmic discrimination, which is a component of algorithmic justice. We are actually moving away from it.
Well, the bigger question, there's the question of trust and trustworthy AI, and whether or not we can trust these systems. And when we remove or reduce or limit fact checking, what we're continuously doing is undermining trust and our ability to trust these systems. When we think about fact checking, and we think about something like the medical space and medical AI, and the fact that so many people go to the internet for medical information. And when you think about dirty data, it's like a pool. You get dirty water into a pool, and it's very hard to take it out. So the more and more disinformation seeps into this pool of data, it's going to become very, very difficult for people who are not as discerning, or who may not be as literate in the AI space. Then it becomes very challenging, and people are using this technology to make decisions. And it also comes back to that question of DEI. DEI is about equity. But equity is also about a business competitiveness. If you're building systems that are not equitable, or you're using data that's not diverse, it doesn't end there. It shows up in the data sets. And many big tech companies have already historically been faced with crises because of a lack of diverse data, or because of not really bringing the requisite ethical guardrails. So it really hits the bottom line eventually, because who are you making these systems for? Who are the users of these systems? These systems are not only being used by one group, they're used by many groups. So when we think about diversity, it's about voice. It's about visibility. It's about individuals with disabilities. It's about access, and access needs to be equitable. Access is also about your profits. So the less people are going to be accessing your technologies, the less, you are going to be benefiting from that. And when we just think about algorithmic justice, there's a whole conversation now about nomenclature and whether or not we can use this word or we can't use that word. But I think we're going to realize eventually, and I think sometimes people say things, and they do. It's all about the sound bites, but it comes back always to the data quality. It comes back to data collection. It comes back to whether or not this data is good enough to create the kinds of models that you are trying to build. So that question of DEI is a question of data. It's a question of data quality, and it's really a question also of data integrity. And that's really important to building any AI model.
Yeah, and presumably also data security, which is the backside of it, because as you're gathering all this data, I mean, we already saw in New York City in the past week, um, they've introduced congestion pricing, and they're taking pictures of license plates, and all of a sudden the data is leaking out there, and people are able to say, well, this car is downtown for this, so that should be setting off some warning signs too, right?
Most definitely. And of course, when we think about data, the thing about data is captures one thing, but it captures so many things at the same time. And once we start to drill into that data, the things that we think may be anonymous or may be hidden become revealed. And that's why data privacy and data protection are critical questions in the discussion about AI and AI governance and ethical and safe AI and responsible and trustworthy AI. I think for me, 2025 is going to be a major year for artificial intelligence. A lot of things are going to happen and a lot of things are not going to happen. And we've got to really think about the ways in which we are imagining this technology and the ways in which we need to reimagine this technology.
Yeah, I think another element that goes on the security side, which we've talked about in a bunch of our episodes and goes more to the geopolitical side of this, is the global South is concerned about being left behind, and that seems reasonable. I think one of the big issues associated with AI that I'm not an AI doomer, but I do think it could conceivably drive inequality in a variety of ways, and certainly the access to AI is the most fundamental of those ways. But a lot of these countries are saying, well, we don't have the capacity here, so we have to bring people in. And if they build our cloud, how do we maintain, data sovereignty? And how do we protect our data from being manipulated, used, and so forth? And, every major country that's advanced is already entering into their adversary systems and fiddling around with, data, stealing data, but that could go in a variety of directions. Um, uh, does that sort of thing concern you as well?
Most definitely. I teach AI ethics and data ethics at the University of Virginia School of Data Science. So data sovereignty is a critical aspect of the course. And I think India has created a very solid model in the ways in which they protect data from coming out of India and the ways in which they ensure that the data that they're dealing with is well protected. And I think when we think about indigenous communities and First Peoples, when we think about the Maori community coming out of New Zealand, and they have some really imaginative and inventive and innovative ways in which they have been also protecting indigenous data. So data sovereignty is a critical aspect of data governance and a critical aspect of AI governance and the ways in which we are thinking about AI. I always say there is no AI without data. Data is the most critical aspect. And I think the moment we are at now is thinking about quantity versus quality. There's a lot of data out there, whether or not we have quality data, because that is what's required, particularly as we are moving into agentic AI systems and more autonomous tools. We've got to get data right. And we can only get that right by doing good data science. And if we do good data science, then we should have much better AI.
Yeah, although we're also getting into the era of generative AI and data being created about entities that didn't exist before and narratives being developed that didn't exist before, and all of a sudden complications associated with that. We don't have a lot of time left, but I do want to end sort of on an upbeat note on these issues of algorithmic justice. Do you think there are places in the U.S. that are starting to get it right? Are there places where you see hope?
Most definitely. I think there's such a vibrant community of practice around algorithmic justice and around data justice. Data justice is about equity. Data justice is about competitiveness. It's about civil rights. It's about human rights. It's about us. And that's what we need to understand about this technology. We are building this technology for ourselves. The technology isn't building itself yet. We may have some generative tools that are giving us a more sophisticated style of predictive text. And that's appreciated because it makes our work a bit easier. But we've got to think deeper than that. What are we doing with this technology? What are the legacies we want to create? How do we want to enhance lives? How do we do sustainable and resilient AI when AI is depleting so many resources when we think about the computing power that we're trying to build? So I think when it comes to data justice, there is sufficient leaders and voices in that space. And I think more and more as people are interacting with this technology and getting to know this technology intimately, they understand the power of this technology, they understand the peril as well, and they understand why certain rights need to be protected for us to really, truly have an equitable experience with AI.
What a great discussion. I'm so sorry that we are out of time here, but I agree with you. 2025 is going to be a big year. It's a little hard to believe it's already started, but it's already started. And I hope that we will be able to coax you to come back and talk about some of these other issues as we go forward, because you've been great. And I'm sure our listeners are grateful and they will follow you and the work that you are doing at UVA and beyond. And we will keep following these issues: data justice, algorithmic discrimination, data ethics, AI and ethics, and the future of AI right here at Civil Consciousness, and hope that all of you will join us each and every week. And as to the issue that Renee mentioned earlier about AI and energy and climate, we will be launching at the end of this month a new additional podcast focusing on AI, energy, and climate, because we think that that's such an important set of issues. So join us here at the DSR Network for all of that and all of our other podcasts. Thank you, Renee. Thank you, everybody, for listening. Bye-bye.